Why do autistic people ask so many questions? Let's talk about that. All right, so I've been wanting to talk about this for a while. I again needed some time to gather my thoughts because this thing that happens so often to me, and I'm sure to a lot of other neurodivergent people, is just something that I notice while it's happening, but I didn't really know for the longest time how to understand why it happens, and then also figure out how I could explain it to other people. So I'm gonna try my best, you guys. Wish me luck. I've noticed that neurodivergent people utilize the why question or questions in general very differently than neurotypical people. And because of that, it causes a lot of miscommunications. Again, quick disclaimer, I'm not trying to generalize people into the categories of neurodivergent versus neurotypical. It's just for the sake of this conversation being simple and as concise as possible, or else I'd be sitting here for 3 hours giving disclaimers and branching off into those different scenarios. For the sake of simplicity, I'm just gonna keep it at neurodivergent and neurotypical. But of course, neurotypical could do the same things as the neurodivergents in these scenarios and vice versa. I've noticed that for me, whenever I ask my questions to the people in my life, I always get a really defensive and almost even frustrated/angry response. And every single time this happens, I always feel not only extremely distraught, but very, very confused because my intention behind asking a question is to simply understand the other person or the situation better. And from my perspective, that is something that is actually good because it shows that I care about the other person and I want to know more about them and I want to understand them. So what's up? Has there been anything new with you lately? Yeah, actually, I've been thinking a lot about switching up my career. I've been really interested in massage therapy and aromatherapy. Oh, really? Why? What made you interested in it? Well, because I think a lot of people could benefit from it. In what ways do you think people can benefit from it? Why are you asking me so many questions? So that's an example of an exchange I had with someone pretty recently of just me asking questions, and then the conversation slowly divulges into a more tense exchange. I'm here where I'm interested and engaged, and they're over here getting more and more frustrated with me and angry, but I don't really notice it until they start to get more visibly defensive and frustrated with me. And then by then I'm just like, I don't know what happened. I don't know when the switch happened. I don't know what I could have done to avoid it. Like, I just feel really confused as to where to take the conversation now because I don't know if I should be apologizing to them or ask them why they're getting tense. But then if they got tense because I was asking questions, would me asking why they're getting tense just make them even more mad? You know what I'm saying? I'm sure this will be different across different cultures. But at least in like a general American society, questions are normalized as more so statements rather than actually asking a question. And this is just an abstract idea. I'm not saying it's definitive or whatever. I don't have concrete proof or research to back this up. This is just me sitting in my office talking about these sort of thoughts that I ruminate on. The reason why I think this happens is because if you think about America and the context of America, America has a lot of different types of people from different backgrounds and cultures, right? And you have a lot of immigrants as well from a bunch of different countries. And when you get a melting pot that big with so many different people, there's bound to be a lot of different conflicting cultures, ways of understanding language and intention. And so if you don't have a good repertoire with the community or people around you, let's say if you're like a person of color or you're an immigrant, things like that, of course, you don't want to step on any toes because you don't want to risk alienation or risk lowering your capabilities to survive. You create these ways of interacting with other people that are very passive or passive aggressive, if that makes sense. And it's not very direct because you don't want to risk that. You know, couple that with the patriarchy, right? Like, women are historically taught to not be confrontational as well. And so there's just a lot of societal history that supports just passive, indirect ways of interacting, which more or less people knew how to function within that throughout history and reap the benefits of being able to assimilate into that social norm. But I think it's interesting because we are in a crossroads in history in many senses, where I think we are on the precipice of seeing those shifts happening, seeing what it means for women to be able to survive and be independent, free of men, things like that. And the same goes for more or less people of color and immigrants, more or less emphasis on that. I'm speaking comparatively to like history, right, in America. And so because of that, now we have a little bit more freedom to perhaps be more direct and develop new ways of communicating, right? But because there's new ways of communication starting to branch out and grow, I think we haven't made that mental switch of being able to understand when someone is, let's say, asking a question to genuinely learn more about you or the situation, and when they're asking a question to perhaps make a statement or judgment towards you. I feel like still to this day, we kind of lean towards the direction of what was historically the norm here, which is that it is used as a passive-aggressive statement. And I feel like this creates a lot of confusion, miscommunication, and unnecessary tension between people because, again, it's not what is actually said, but how someone translate what is said. This is an issue that kind of can be expanded out towards, just cultural differences as well. An example of that is, culturally speaking, let's say in East Asian culture, eye contact and direct eye contact and inserting or asserting yourself over another person is not really acceptable, and it's a sign of disrespect, whereas in American culture, asserting yourself and making direct eye contact is a sign of respect. So it's like the same action will mean different things to different cultures because there's different contexts there. In a sense, I think that's why it's so hard for, at least me, I don't know about other autistic people, but for me to take these social observations and be able to fully understand, digest, and figure out how to express it to people, because there's just so many angles to process one specific experience because there's so many things to take into account. Whereas, let's say you go to a more homogenous country where, let's say Korea, there's mostly just East Asian Koreans. And so when you get a more homogenized country, there's just a lot less of these misunderstandings because they kind of know what that norm is and how to follow it pretty well. Whereas when you get a country like America, my parents immigrated here, right? So they didn't grow up on this culture. So there's a lot of cultural norms that I wasn't able to learn because I wasn't able to learn it directly from my parents. And whatever culture I did directly learn from them wasn't necessarily applicable to my environment because I learned social norms rooted in Taiwan, but I was enacting those social norms here in America. I feel like the reason why a lot of autistic people could ask a lot of questions or a lot of why questions specifically is because we want to understand the purpose of why someone's doing something or why is something happening a certain way or why is something happening altogether. I feel like when you can understand the why, you could begin to fill in all those blanks that you don't have information for. And I think it's different for non-autistic people because I feel like non-autistic people, they know how to fill in those blanks themselves without needing to ask those questions.
Oh, hey, Aaron, I'm expecting a shipment of pens. Can you cover that?
Mm-hmm. Cover that. What does that mean exactly? What are we talking here? Details.
A delivery guy will deliver a box of pens, and you just make sure everything's in order.
What? Everything? What? How do I make sure it's in order? I haven't been trained for this.
Okay, see you later.
Hey, look who it is.
Sorry. Super busy. Pens coming in later. Just grabbing a 𝗏𝗏 before all hell breaks loose.
Try this one.
Thank you. I don't really have time to think about Pete right now. I just have a lot going on with this whole shipment of pens.
That's a really good example of someone not knowing how to fill in those blanks themselves. It's not an intrinsic skill. They have to be able to ask questions to the person for that person to fill in the blanks for us to know how to execute something in a specific way. Whereas for a lot of neurotypical people or 𝗪istic people, they would know how to just sign a package for the pens and to put the pens away without the boss needing to specify how to do that whole process. You know what I'm saying? Because you have to take into account, if you're an autistic person and you don't really have a good grasp of what social norms are or why those social norms are there, it's harder for you to partake in those social norms. But if you can understand why you're doing something or why something has to be played out a certain way and how that is going to be perceived a certain way and how all of that makes sense in contingency with each other, it allows you to integrate more smoothly into interactions. You know what I'm saying? And I feel like without knowing why, like if for whatever reason we can't get the answer as to why we have to do something, it's a lot harder for us to be able to meet other people's expectations, which is something we're viscerally trying to avoid because we don't want to pay the consequences of not meeting expectations, right? That's not fun because people are going to assume that you're incompetent. People are going to assume that you might be passive aggressive, like you purposefully didn't do something right because you just don't care or you don't care about them. When in reality, it's not about that at all. It's just like, I didn't know how to do it the way you wanted me to because I didn't have enough information. You know what I'm saying? Essentially, when we're asking why questions, it shows that we care and it shows that we want to do things the right way and we want to make sure of all of that. I always use my partner as an example because that's the person I interact with the most. I remember one time when my partner and I first moved in together, he asked me if I could go turn on the dryer for him. And so I go into the laundry room and I go to turn the dryer on, but I saw that there were already clothes in there. And then I opened the dryer and I touched the clothes and I felt that they were all dry. And so I thought to myself, oh, maybe he forgot that he already dried his clothes, so I don't really need to turn it on then. I just went back to where he was and we continued on with our night. And then later on, he went into the laundry room to go get his clothes and he went to feel that the clothes weren't warm or hot. And he asked me, "Did you turn the dryer on?" And I said, "Oh, I didn't turn it on because the clothes were already dry." And then he said, "I didn't ask you to dry my clothes. I asked you to turn the dryer on." And then, that kind of sarcastic laugh where you just can't believe what's happening. And I was just like, when you tell someone to turn the dryer on, usually they would translate that as, "Can you help me dry my clothes?" Naturally, if I were to see that your clothes were already dry, I would compute and fill in the blanks as to, he wanted me to help dry his clothes. He probably forgot that they were already dry, so I'm not going to press the on button on the dryer again. And then he said, "No, I meant it very literally because I dried it a long time ago and I wanted to dry it again because I wanted to get the wrinkles out. And so when I asked you to turn the dryer on, it's not to dry the clothes, but to get the wrinkles out." After we bantered about this for 10 minutes and we were just on the floor laughing, but also yelling at each other, calling each other crazy. We weren't being serious, you guys, please. Sometimes you guys are way too serious in the comments and you like to say that my partner has bad intentions in these moments. Like, it's not that serious in these moments, trust me. Because up until this point, every time I asked him the why question when he asked me to do something, or if he's just talking about something and I want to know more about it and I ask why, he would get frustrated because he's used to people using the why question as an indirect way of telling him he's incompetent or judging him, basically. And so I've had to tell him again and again, remind him, when I ask you why, it means I genuinely want to know more and I care. It doesn't mean I'm saying that you're wrong for choosing what you did or whatever. I'm not questioning you. I'm just asking to understand. And so I reiterated in that moment with the whole dryer fiasco. I was like, this is why I need to know why. Because in these situations where I am expected to fill in the blanks, I end up not filling in the blanks correctly because I wasn't filled in on why I need to do that specific thing. You know what I'm saying? Another example of this, I went to go wash one of our rugs by myself and I needed to get quarters for it. And I remember he called me and he said, "Irene, are you going to go wash the rug right now?" And I said, "Yes." And then he said, "Okay, so there's a pile of quarters on my desk. don't use those quarters. I put some quarters in the coin jar and it's placed on the top of this shelf. Use those quarters. In my head, I was like, I don't know why he made this whole process of the quarters so complicated, but whatever. I heard him. I said yes, and then I hung up. Fast forward, a couple things went wrong on my day, and then I was running low on time. I was in a rush. And so I decided, because I didn't have enough time, that I didn't want to go through the trouble of reaching onto the top of the shelf to get the coin jar, because I would have had to literally go on my tippy toes to get it. And then now I have to dump it out and separate the quarters from all of the pennies, nickels, and dimes. And I just did not have enough time for that. So I went over to his desk, I took his pile of quarters, and then I went to the laundromat and washed the rug, and I came home. Later on that day, we reconvened at home, and he saw that the pile of quarters was smaller. And he said, Irene, did you use the quarters on my desk? And I said, yes. And then he started to get really, really worked up about that, which confused me because I didn't know why. Again, this is why it's so important for us to know the why. He said, I literally saved those quarters on my desk because they were like special coins, whereas the quarters in the coin jar were just normal quarters. And he basically was like, you used all my special quarters. I got so frustrated too for him. And I remember saying, this is why you have to explain to me why you want something a certain way. Because if things worked out as planned throughout my day, it would have been easier for me to just listen to the specific directions he gave me, because that's how I planned that day out. But because everything in my day started to go awry and all my scheduling started to go off, it made it harder for me to still stick by those specific instructions, because I was now needing to kind of adjust my process and everything I was needing to do to make up for that lost time and to make up for things not going as planned. But that's a good example of why knowing why would have helped in that situation, because I would have known in that situation that I couldn't afford to adjust to my schedule, and that even though my schedule was off, I still had to adhere to his specific instructions because it was important to him. But I didn't know that, so I didn't think it was that serious. I don't know, it's just really difficult. I'm not even saying anyone's right or wrong in this situation. Sometimes knowing why isn't enough. And once someone establishes the why, they can move on to asking how questions. And I think this is why a lot of people could get really frustrated with us when we're asking question after question after question, because they think to themselves, you should already know these things, or it should be obvious to fill in the blanks, when in reality, there's different norms for different people in different situations, different cultures, and your norm isn't necessarily the norm of others. So you kind of have like a blank slate every time in different situations. And that's why every single time you have to partake in something, you have to establish information. Why is this happening? Why am I doing it this way? How do I do it? You know what I'm saying? That pen video that I showed you guys from The Office is a really good example of this. Like, how do you want me to do this? What do you mean I'm waiting for the package or for the pens and whatnot? And I feel like when you're not able to get your questions answered as to why or how, it puts a lot of stress on our brains, because we now have to utilize every spoon possible. I imagine like a goalie at a soccer game with a lot of really good soccer players, and they're all just punting balls at you, and you have to be on high alert, making sure that you're blocking off every ball that's trying to get into your goal. That's kind of what it feels like to not have enough information, but be put in situations where you have to respond accordingly and be expected to respond correctly, even though you don't really know what that means. Like Erin having to be on high alert all day and she can't do anything else because she's waiting for that one thing to happen. If she had gotten her questions answered thoroughly enough by Pam as to why she has to do things with the pen and how she has to do it, I'm sure she would have enough spoons to be able to do other stuff in her day leading up to the whole pen exchange, right? And I think that's where that behavior pattern comes from, of like, I have this one thing that I know I have to do and I can't do anything else until I get that one thing done. It's a common experience for neurodivergent people when we have phone calls, for example, to be like, I can't do anything else in my day or have any other responsibilities until I have that phone call or until I have that appointment, because I'm just waiting on it. It's because you're essentially saving up what little spoons you have for that particular situation, because you don't know how it's going to work out, and you need those spoons to be able to kind of roll with the punches. Whereas if you were to think to yourself hypothetically, if you know exactly how that phone call is going to go, what questions are going to be asked, what information is going to be exchanged, who you're going to be talking to, what their demeanor is like, would you still be as anxious or unable to do other stuff in your day leading up to that appointment? For a lot of people, they'll probably say no. Like, if I had all that information and I prepared for it, then I could probably just do other stuff throughout my day, because I could save 2 spoons for that phone call, because that phone call requires 2 spoons, and I could use my other spoons for other stuff. But there's this concept that if someone has a lot of questions, that they're incompetent, right? And it's crazy because I feel like it's a norm to think that way and to make those judgments on people who ask a lot of questions. But if you actually study and listen to the world's smartest people, whether that's scientists, doctors, philosophers, so on and so forth, they always say that the smartest people are the people who asks the most questions. And so I'm just wondering where the disconnect is. Like, if the smartest people on earth think that there's no stupid questions, and the more questions you ask indicates how much smarter you are than an average person, then why do average people think that questions indicate that you're stupid, or incompetent? But yeah, I feel like whenever I am talking to another neurodivergent person and they always follow up a question or a statement with, I'm sorry if that's stupid, I'm sorry if that's obvious, or I'm sorry if this isn't necessary, I always like to genuinely say, that is not stupid. That is not unnecessary, because things aren't as straightforward as we think it is. This information or this question you ask may not seem like it's correlated, but if we were to actually give it the time of day, process it, dissect it, then we would realize why you brought it up, like we would realize why it is connected to this conversation. And I'm not here to judge the things that you bring up. I'm here to actually hear you out and explore why you brought that up in the conversation to begin with, and figure out the importance of it. I think in a sense, that's why I also love interacting with children, because they ask so many why questions. And I feel like a good indication as to where someone is with their relationship to the why is how they respond to kids who ask questions. Because I feel like there's 2 adults in that sense, where sometimes I see kids asking an adult a bunch of questions, and the adult is the type of adult to genuinely ponder on the question and think to themselves, wow, this child asked a really valid, interesting question. And then there's the other adult who gets really frustrated with the kid. Why are they asking me so many questions? They're bothering me. I feel like those type of adults and their responses to questions and children asking them questions is a good indication of how dismissive they probably are within their internal dialogue. And those people are most likely very closed-minded, like at some point in their life, again and again, were trained to not question themselves or other people and to just keep following a certain normality. To an extent, they've created a little space for themselves where they could function in that little bubble. And so when there's someone that comes in and they almost challenge that bubble and they show through these questions that there's existence of other bubbles around them, it's extremely frustrating for that person to see it, because they see the potential of what could be and what isn't for them. And they don't want to allow themselves to ponder on that, because seeing that the grass is greener on the other side, for example, makes you resent your current reality and your past choices even more. I love when kids ask me questions. I love pondering on the question if I don't know the answer to it. I love answering the question if I do know the answer to it. I feel like questions is such a great way to just pick you up from where you are and allow you to realize the expansiveness of the world. I think a lot of neurodivergent people tend to be question askers, more or less. That's where some of those qualities can come from, of daydreaming, or just on Google searching all the randomest things, or when you randomly hyper focus on something and you're just searching everything up that is related to it. It all stems from questioning Why is it like this? How is it like this? What is like this? You know, never be afraid to ask questions. Never stop asking questions. If you are the type of person that's always wondering, try not to feel ashamed of it. Perhaps you can't share that part of yourself with every single person, but at the same time as well, if someone doesn't respond well to your questions, it's not necessarily your job to take on some unresolved issues that they have within themselves and identify with it being your fault. If someone is frustrated with your questions, triggered by your questions, don't necessarily stop. Keep asking them. And if they want to directly bring up why they're getting frustrated or triggered and want to talk about it with you, just address it with them too and hear them out and be like, that makes sense, you know? It makes sense that my questions frustrate you, but that doesn't mean I should stop because I'm not meaning it to make you feel incompetent or I'm not judging you. I'm just genuinely trying to learn more about this topic or you. In a sense, being able to challenge someone who thinks differently can sometimes allow opportunity for them to grow outside of a mentality that may not be serving them either, because it kind of creates a space where they could maybe, if they so choose to, see, you know what? It's not always bad when people ask me. There are people out there who genuinely want to learn and are curious and aren't trying to make me feel bad. Maybe this is a time or opportunity where I could start to actually answer those questions and not have those frustrated responses. That's the thing, is sometimes you are going to be that mirror to someone. You are going to be that catalyst for someone, that trigger for someone. And yes, sometimes that means that negative energy can be directed towards you, but so long as you can practice not taking that on and being a witness to, okay, they're obviously projecting on me and it's valid, but it's not my fault, you know, that's just their own issues. As long as you could kind of maintain that sort of strength, you could be a really great light in someone's life. But anyways, thank you guys for listening to me ramble and just have my stream of consciousness. Stay curious and take some time to regulate yourself today. Bye, guys.